Welcome back. Chinese and American cultures are very different, very distinct, and in terms of their sensitivities, a world apart. So how does one bridge that divide? How does one make the best of both worlds? Joining me now from New York, Chinese-American professor Ann Lee, who teaches at New York University. She's also the author of the book, What the U.S. Can Learn from China. Also with me from California, blogger and commentator Latoya Peterson. She specializes in American pop culture with a special focus on video games, film, TV, and music. I want to welcome both of you to the show. Let me ask you right off the bat, and Ann, why don't I start with you? When it comes to social norms, traditions, what are the key differences, would you say, between Americans and Chinese?
I would say the most distinct differences are the fact that U.S. remains a very religious country. Most parts of the country, in fact, still don't believe in evolution. And this is distinctly different from China, where over 90% of the people would say that they believe in evolution, and religion hasn't figured in a big part of their culture. It's starting to be allowed in China, but in terms of the religious differences, it's night and day. The other one I would say is the fact that Americans really pride themselves on freedom and individuality, while if you look at China, there was a lot of structure and just a lot of folks, respecting elders and sort of following a much more restrictive social code that doesn't exist really in the U.S.
Well, let me piggyback off of that, because I'd like to draw Latoya into the conversation, because I know you spend a lot of time looking at American pop culture. And what's interesting, I think, is you're seeing this this kind of worship. She's talking about traditions that date back quite a long time. But you're seeing this worship of Hollywood, video games, not just here in the United States, but also in China and India. And some people are alarmed about that. What would you say about that, Latoya?
I'd say there's nothing to be afraid of, really. American pop culture is fun and sticky because we like to take a lot of risks. We're kind of a country of reinvention, and we like to try things over and over again, reinvent, make something new. And I feel as though Americans would be receptive to Chinese pop culture if we could just figure out kind of what it is and where it is. There was a popular rapper, his name was Jin, and he's Chinese-American. And there was recently a documentary made about him because he found actually more success in China than he did in the United States. And as someone who pays a lot of attention, particularly to music and hip-hop, it's fascinating to me that almost every country in the world has some kind of hip-hop subculture going. But I haven't been able to hear much coming out of China. And so it's interesting. I feel like there's a lot there, but for some reason, we're just not getting it over here.
Ann, I want to ask you about this, though, because about the traditions. Is there a concern that, that the Chinese-American kids are just becoming maybe too Americanized, and some of the traditions may be falling by the wayside?
The Americanization of some of China, or the Chinese youth, is not all necessarily bad if they're learning to be more innovative. But I would say a lot of American pop culture, unfortunately, is very superficially entertaining too, right? I mean, you just turn on the TV and what you see are a lot of slutty women with giant boobs. I mean, you got Jersey Shore, Jersey Housewives, Kardashians. I mean, it's not hard to see why American pop culture spread so quickly. I mean, it's hard for young teenagers around the world to not enjoy that. So,
I want to get Latoya.
So I guess that's the part that a lot of Chinese elders get worried about.
Well, let's get Latoya a chance to jump in here on that. I saw you smile when she was talking about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because we can always point fingers at other cultures, right, and be like, oh, well, Americans are really slutty, or, these people don't have this or that doesn't happen. But what is actually the case is that people are responding to something kind of deep-seated. In the reality TV, that's a relatively new phenomenon that's been like the last 10 years, and it's only been the last 5 years when we've seen that really train wrecky style behavior that Ann is talking about. Mm-hmm. But it's also the fact that it's exported means that people can relate to it in some ways, just like the stuff that comes from British TV to America. A lot of times it's the same thing. The only way is Essex is essentially Jersey Shore with British people. Like it's these things that are coming around, and I think that it's a symptom or actually not really a symptom, but it's a reflection of our increasingly globalized society, right? That we're starting to take and learn from each other. We're connected in ways that weren't possible before the internet. We're connected in ways that provide all kinds of possibilities and solutions with travel, with commerce, with everything. And so I think we should all just kind of expect the fact that it's not necessarily, I think, the Americanization of other cultures, but the fact that cultures are becoming more of a one global culture. And we're starting to feed in different things from different places and create something entirely new. And I think that we won't be able to see what the full effect of that is for about 20 more years.
Well, let's talk about these two particular cultures. How can they complement one another, would you say, Latoya?
I think that there's so much that's fascinating about each culture, and that I think more exchange and more conversation is great. You know, one of my friends, Ann Chaomina, she did some translation work for Ai Weiwei, and she did a lot on Chinese memes from ROFLCon, and just looking at Chinese internet culture and what has arisen and the play in words and things like that. That's something that's fascinating and beautiful, and I feel like it beautifully complements, you know, American internet culture with our creation of memes and pictures and icons. It's like almost as if the internet is forming this kind of new global language that we're all starting to participate in.
I want to jump back
so
to...
I see there's a lot of room for compliment.
I want to jump back to Ann in just a minute, but I want to kind of piggyback off something you talked about earlier. Here's this artist you were talking about who you were unfamiliar with. Why do you think Chinese culture and maybe some of these performers aren't breaking through here in the United States or in the West, per se?
Well, you know, I've had a lot of conversations about this, particularly because Japan and Korea, South Korea in particular, have made some huge inroads into the United States market and are really focusing on trying to crack there. They have fan bases here. But I feel like, you know, China just doesn't have the same kind of desire to be in the American market, right? It's just so difficult to get information out from China, right? There's a Japanese iTunes that I can easily go to and check out whatever I want from that country. There's a, you know, South Korea, there's tons of blogs and different things that are in English that are available and accessible to American listeners who are fans of K-pop. But there isn't that for China. And I've always found that very, very perplexing, like what's going on with maybe it's censorship, or maybe it's a firewall, or maybe it's a combination of things, or maybe people feel as though what's popular in China doesn't translate to the United States. But I would think that we would need to really start reconsidering that, particularly since culture is such a huge part of any nation's exports, right? Who you are, what you eat, what you listen to, what you read, that's an integral part of your culture, of your society, of how people can understand you. I used to work with this woman from Singapore, and she used to watch American Idol just so she could talk to me, and we'd have some kind of like commonality of something to share, right? And so it'd be interesting to see that, those kind of walls around kind of what China can be come down, because the little bits that are getting through are really interesting. Well,
let's hope Jersey Shores isn't the first thing to hit China. But Ann, I wanted to get your thoughts.
Well, I think part of it is a function of the fact that China is still a developing country, and so their public relations, their marketing, their brand management, these are all areas and skills that they have yet to develop, and so they haven't been able to really package their culture necessarily for prime time, perhaps. So I think that could be one reason that it's not coming out and translating well. I mean, another thing is that I was a professor out there in China, and I have to say a lot of the students study a lot. And so they spend so much time studying. How is that really exportable? I don't think teenagers in Africa really want to watch Chinese students studying 18 hours a day on reality TV to be yelled at by their parents. I mean, this is really what is going on for a large swath of the population. It's very competitive. They value education a lot, and that's part of their culture, and that doesn't come across as terribly entertaining to the rest of the world. Well, so we've got that part too.
Just having two kids go through college, I got to tell you that competitive nature is not just in China. It's here in the United States too, and very much so here on the East Coast. Latoya, Ann, thank you both for joining us today. Certainly appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.